Is May 6th, 2020. It's about 5:30 p.m. on the East Coast. And today we are joined by somebody a little different. We are joined by the CEO of MyoKardia, and I'm going to try not to mutilate his name, Tassos Gianakakos.
Awesome.
Okay. We had that discussion beforehand that Lisa doesn't do well with those names. So over the next few minutes, people will be populating into the feed. So they'll be watching us live. If you're watching us live at 5:30 East Coast time on May 6th, during the conversation, we will open it up to Q&A, and you can put your questions in the comment section, and we will address them live. If you're watching this after the live broadcast and you leave a question, HCMA staff will address it later, or you can email us at support@4hcm.org. So we have people joining us now. So we're live, and we have an audience that we're building. So I wanted to take this opportunity for our HCM community to better understand who the company MyoKardia is, what they're working on, and who is at the helm leading this company in a new space for us, which is therapeutics that are kind of geared right to the HCM population. So Tassos, why don't you start us off with telling us a little bit about who you are, and then we can talk about who MyoKardia is.
I would love to. And Lisa, I just got to thank you for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to talk to your viewers here. And we were just saying before jumping on, I mean, if it wasn't for you starting the HCMA, I don't know, I wouldn't be talking to anybody right now. We really need you, and really are grateful for your efforts here. And I know it doesn't feel all that positive maybe every single day, but what you're doing is really important. So I started kind of working in this industry maybe about 20 plus years ago in a big drug company called Merck. But I grew up in Chicago. I have my parents are from Greece, and they were born there. So an immigrant family, blue collar, middle class, kind of immigrant work ethic. Education was a big deal. And I went to undergrad at MIT, and when I got there, I kind of had a couple of people really influence me, in particular, a professor named Danny Wong, into going into essentially the life sciences and pharmaceutical industry. So that I was hooked from that point, and my first job was at Merck, and I was working on essentially improving the processes to make some of the drugs, and in particular the biologics at Merck. And, I was there for a couple of years, and, my father was kind of an entrepreneur. He owned gas stations. I worked there every summer, and Shell stations, if, for folks who are interested. And it was an awesome experience, just interacting with people and sort of being, nimble and entrepreneurial, right? And you don't really get a lot of that as a super junior person at a massive organization like Merck. So I learned a ton, but kind of figured I needed to do something a little bit different. So I went back to school to figure it out. I went to business school. I went to Harvard Business School. And kind of between the first 2 years there, I took an internship in the Bay Area at a biotech startup and just loved it. It was, 15, 20 people. I was doing kind of business strategy, which was interesting for a former kind of engineer scientist. And that was it. And so, MyoKardia is 4 startups since, and I've had a wonderful time learning about how to kind of lead and do science, and kind of hopefully come up with really important medicines that can help society.
So I like the way you worded that, to do science. I think there's a big need in this country right now to do a lot of science and not a lot of hypothesis. But I digress to COVID times, which, by the way, day 55, where's my...
There it is.
There it is. That's pointing the wrong way. Day 55 in quarantine here. So that tells us how you came up, and you made the joke that you did grow up in that big fat Greek wedding scenario.
Exactly.
I didn't realize it was Chicago exactly, but yeah, you did the same thing. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I think there was a statue in front of my house growing up, right? The Venus de Milo. So if you've seen that movie, the Windex was not a big part of my upbringing, but pretty much everything else sounds about right.
I could have explained that the Windex got you interested in what stops infections or something, because maybe it was something in the Windex. Okay, so that's how you got to be you, but how did MyoKardia get to be MyoKardia?
Well, so the company, one thing that I will say, which I think there's a few things special about MyoKardia, and for sure I am biased and I'm all into what the company's doing, but it is a company that is mission driven and values based. We've got a different scientific approach, at least for developing drugs for, heart related diseases than we've seen, I think, over the last 30 or 40 years. And we're really focused on the disease. So we're not kind of working on one drug and then, something magical happens if we get positive results on a drug. It's really about understanding and doing research deeply to shed more light on what's driving the disease, how to better manage it, how to intervene with therapies. And that involves bringing folks like you into the picture really early. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that. But MyoKardia kind of was formed by a group. I'm going to call them investors, but they were really a group of scientists who were involved in developing therapies and then got together to invest in new companies and form new companies. It's a group called Third Rock Ventures. They started thinking about all of this wonderful progress that we're making in oncology and in cystic fibrosis. This is now, I want to say, maybe 2010, 11. And they were responsible for starting up companies like Foundation Medicine and Blueprint and Bluebird. And these are folks that are in gene therapy and are doing things like molecularly typing tumors. So this whole idea of moving from chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery in oncology, right, which is where we were 20 years ago for lung cancer, et cetera, to now having all of these targeted medicines that are making a big difference for patients was kind of going on. And that was where all the investment was happening. And one of the partners was a cardiologist and said, wait, are we still kind of doing beta blockers? Is there any progress we can do? Can we apply this model to the world's #1 killer, right? And you know this, Lisa, and I mean, it drives me a little bit crazy that we are ignoring, at least relatively speaking, the conversation is so vibrant in Washington and, in the public kind of media around cancer, and appropriately. But we've got to talk more about these heart conditions and cardiovascular disease, cardiomyopathies, and heart failure. I mean, I think at least at the same level, and really encourage that conversation. So Third Rock was looking at the field and saying, listen, there's clearly a need here for innovation. We haven't done a whole lot. We've got to do something. So has the field kind of advanced enough where in genetics and the underlying biology to really be able to start a company that can come up with a drug? And so the way they did things back then, and all of these people, by the way, they kind of said, who's kind of thinking about these diseases? And you came up, right? And folks like Cricket Seidman and John Seidman and Leslie Linewand, these are all scientists who've devoted, and of course Jim Spudich at Stanford devoted the last, I want to say, several decades to understanding either how the heart works, how the muscles in the heart work, understanding the genetics behind inherited cardiovascular disease, and also coming up with some animal models. So those guys got together. Third Rock put in some money early on, and then went out and got folks like me and more importantly, the talented scientists at MyoKardia to get rolling. And that all happened in 2012, 2013. I joined in October of 13. And I was looking at my notes. In April of 14, I was in a room with you in New Jersey,
Yes, you
trying
were.
to understand the disease from your point of view.
Yep, that was a while ago, and it started with a conversation. And I'm going to tie parts of the story together. I was at the American Heart Association. It was in Orlando that year. I was walking down the street, taking a couple hours of sunshine break, and my phone rang. And it was some investor guy starting to ask me some very good questions about HCM and treatment. And I've gotten those investment calls before, like, is there a business model here? Can we do something in this space? But his questions were different. He was very science driven and burden of disease focused and wanting to understand what centers of excellence were. And this is going back to 12, 13, before you. And I figured I'd never hear from these people again. Well, little did I know that I was part of the intel gathering to figure out if there was a business model in MyoKardia. And years later, I come to find out that that was the base investor group who went ahead to create all of this. And I remember being at an advisory meeting with Cricket Seidman, who pulled me aside and said, there's something breaking. We're working on something, and it's going to be different. and that it's very, very different. We're hanging up the concept of beta blocker, calcium channel blocker, or reusing things that were used in other diseases to say we're different.
Right.
We need something for us. And I love that concept. We're still working on proving that concept out.
Oh, for
So
sure.
let's talk a little bit about where, that's kind of the starting principles. At that point, I think you might have had 15, 18 employees, somewhere in that zone.
Yeah.
And now where are you in terms of employee base?
So we're around, I would say around 250 or 260 people now, and of full-time employees, and of the ecosystem and the network, the community is much larger than that. You're part of it. All of the HCM centers are part of it. The patients and families are part of it, and so it's way extended. And we think of ourselves as part of that ecosystem, and we've got to operate. I'm super encouraged and not surprised to hear that the investors got in touch with you before they even put a dollar into the company, because that's the right way to look at it, right? I mean, we're not out trying to figure out, so MyoKardia is not out trying to create medicines that are not important, that don't do what patients need, and that aren't accessible to patients. So that is not the point. The point here is to, essentially cure this disease, right? And so we have to
Oh, you use
understand
the
it.
C word, Tassos. I don't use the C word.
Hey,
You use
that's
the
the
E word.
dream.
It is the dream.
That's what we got to aspire to, and we may not get there, but that's got to be a goal.
It is a goal. I do want to just go over something that came up in the question line, and I want to be very clear about something. Somebody asked if I had anything to disclose about stock ownership. Number one, I personally do not own any stock in any biotech, period. Won't do it. If it happens to be part of a mutual fund, that's part of a mutual fund that I don't control. The HCMA does not hold any stock. Tassos, you hold stock.
I do.
So you're a CEO, so that's part of your compensation package. And
Right.
obviously, we want you to be invested in the success of the company, because it's your job to make it succeed and to get us what we need, and that is a good therapeutic. So I just wanted to address that before it got lost in the feed of questions. But I have too much insider information, and I don't like handcuffs in jail, so I don't buy stock at all. Probably hurting me financially, but that's better. Anyway, I digress. So the investor community came together, MyoKardia came together, they brought scientists to the table, and then we really started talking about things focusing on cardioenergetics or the sarcomere specifically. Do you want to talk a little bit about the science?
Absolutely. Yeah. So you obviously know a lot of this, and the families out there know and have experienced aspects of HCM and maybe even DCM. But we started to learn. I want to say in the early '90s that the changes that we see in how the heart functions were driven by a particular set of mutations that were in the sarcomeres, you point out, or the proteins in the contractile apparatus, in the heart, the muscle cells. Before that, we had observed that this was a heritable disease, and we had kind of classified it certain ways. But it was until then that we didn't really know exactly where to look for the causes. So that's early '90s. So we're like, great, this is great from a scientific standpoint. We can start kind of shining a light really deeply at these proteins and try and understand what about the mutation, what is it doing, and how does it lead to what we know is a thick heart that is overcontracting and then is challenged to relax and fill, and then all of the sort of clinical consequences that come from that. So, about 15 years passed or so, and we started to see that these mutations end up causing in most cases, the vast majority of cases, cause too much of the motor protein in the heart muscle cell to be engaged with each heartbeat. So the heartbeat is typically the same in HCM, but with these motor proteins engaged, and the estimates are, you and I kind of sitting here relaxing, we've got maybe 15 or 20% of those proteins engaged in part of the squeeze cycle with every heartbeat. If you wanted to run up out of the room, you might go up to 30 to 40%, right? And if I, wanted to catch a bus, if we have a heart attack and some of the cell dies, so we want to have some redundancy in that.
Right.
In HCM, the baseline level is closer to 40%. So more squeeze with each heartbeat. So it was that idea that, and it took a while to kind of, that's a very abbreviated story. A lot of hard work and research went into
That was about
identifying
40
that.
years and 3 sentences.
Yeah, exactly. And so the idea was, could we design a therapy that specifically targeted that motor protein and just kind of reduced the number that were engaged with each heart rate back to normal, but not do it in a way that still allows folks to exert themselves when they need to, right? So you still can access the reserve motor and just have the right level of balance. And that's where I think in 2013 we discovered a molecule that is now in phase 3 development, and that's what it's been designed to do. And so, the idea was, we're getting to know, at least at the molecular level, what is causing sort of what we think is the jumping off point for all of the clinical consequences that everyone experiences: shortness of breath, fatigue, etc., and more downstream from that: heart failure, AFib, sudden cardiac death, as you know
Mm-hmm.
very, very well. And so if we can get at the root cause, and this was going on in rare diseases like CF, it's going on in HIV and hepatitis, right? We have these drugs that can do that. Let's do something like that here. And so we were looking at that, and that's a general principle for all of our research programs, is to try and understand what causes the disease at the, as we say, the molecular level. Design a targeted therapy that just goes there, doesn't go to other places that might have other effects, in other organs. And that, at least that's the philosophy. And then if we want to then prove that, as again, in animals first, and then, as we get more and more comfortable that it's doing something that could be potentially beneficial, and we have a good feel for the safety, that we're not kind of putting folks at risk, we then move into clinical trials, and that's where we're at here. So all of that kind of gave birth to this idea that we can do precision medicine in cardiovascular disease. We can be inspired by the genetics to identify where to look and how to design new therapies. And the hope is that if we can get to these causal pathways, as we say, we can really stop a lot of the downstream issues from happening, which also tells us, we want to, if we do end up getting these therapies out, it probably makes sense to try and treat earlier, right? As you know, this is a progressive disease. And so, the sooner we can kind of intervene, hopefully, the less kind of effect that these mutations have on the physiology of the heart that, may or may not be reversible. So let's get early, better diagnosis, more targeted therapies, connection with the right physicians as you're working hard to make sure that happens. So, and all of that, I mentioned that simply because we take an integrated view of that. So, we work with you, we work improving just the general awareness of the disease, patient care, educating, just forgetting about whether we're actually ever able to get a therapy, which we hope we can, but we still know that these other pieces are critical, right? So it's all part of a continuum of effort to just get folks more aware of the disease so they can better manage it.
So you just brought up a ton of really important issues, and I'm going to start unpacking them piece by piece. So understanding mechanism, critical. We know that we've had fantastic scientists working on this through lots of different mechanisms for funding, some through NIH grants, some through, foundation grants, some through industry grants, and there's been a lot of research going on. Now, there's a company involved doing its own research and working off of the work that's already been created, because that's how science happens. Somebody finds something, somebody makes it better, and we just keep going up until hopefully someday we either eradicate or cure a disease. And to me, there's a big difference between those words, which we might get into later. But somebody brought up, this stocks and how is this funded, and where do you come up with the type of money that you need for a niche industry like hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, a 1 in 200-300 prevalence, maybe 500, depending on how you're looking at each gene mutation? What does that look like? You were the business guy. How do we make money?
I'll tell you, it's interesting to think about how there are a lot of biotech companies. Last check, I think it's over 1,000, and there seem at moments there is more or less private money. So this is money early on before a company is listed on the stock market in a public exchange, and that's usually where many of these companies get started. And I'll tell you, having been through now 4 of these startup situations where a part of my job in each case was to match investors to what we were trying to do. Really, what you want to do, Warren Buffett said this once, is you get the investors you deserve, right? And I think you want to be you, right? You want to basically say this is what the company is going to be about, and you attract folks who are excited by that. And believe me, in all cases that I've been a part of, it screens out a lot of people who are totally not interested in what you're doing. Um, there are companies that you know of in biotech. So there's a couple of different models for these companies, and I'm going to simplify and generalize a bit too, if you give me permission here. Many companies will think about advancing a therapy. And so, we have a molecule, we got it from either another company or from a lab, and we're going to move it through clinical development. And then you've got companies who will have a particular technology orientation. We're seeing a lot of vaccine development for COVID, and
Right.
some of the companies are looking at RNA-based vaccines. So they'll have platforms that could go into a number of different disease areas, and their central expertise is in developing those RNAs and then developing those particular therapies with that modality. MyoKardia started with insights and interest in the disease. There wasn't any IP per se. There wasn't a platform. It was a folks who said this. We've got to just go deep in understanding this disease. And what does that look like? It looks like developing patient registries, understanding the genetics, getting genetic databases together, developing genetic pig models. I mean, we did this very early on, and so we have now pigs that have the R403Q mutation, and they develop HCM. Pig
Mm-hmm.
heart, maybe not surprising to some, is very similar to the human heart in terms of size, heart rate. So it's a wonderful model for us that translates very well. So it's a role that the animals play before we get into clinical trials in humans. So MyoKardia started by basically saying, listen, we're a disease company, we're going to go deep, and we're going to follow the science in the service of patients, and that's going to take money. And I want to say, when we started up, thankfully we had Third Rock, who at the time put a large sum of money in it. It was around $38 million into the first round of funding, which is called the Series A round. And that was a big deal because at the time, I want to say that probably was, 5 times more than the typical biotech startup got. And it allowed us to really think long-term and deep about science, developing some of these tools, which oftentimes you just don't have the money to do. And their view was, if we do science the right way, something important is going to come out of it. And there wasn't a lot of NPVs or these financial models on revenues. It was do good science in diseases that actually need therapeutic innovation, and good things will happen. So that was kind of the early story, Lisa, for investors after Third Rock. And I will say, I remember kind of going out with my colleagues to fundraise, and what do? We put together a pitch, right? And we say, this is what the company's about. Here's what we want to do, and we want to raise 30, 40, 50 million dollars. And we think you guys are, based on some of the investments you've made, you might be interested. And you just go around and you hit the street, and it's a grind, right? And
I can imagine.
I think the hit rate could be 10 to 1, and you want to find folks who are not just giving you money, but who are really thinking about the disease in the same way, right? It's like any partnership. You want folks who are ready to support the science in the same way you think about it. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for tension. And
Right.
so early on, I can't say we had everybody on the planet was excited to invest in the company, but we had a core motivated set of awesome investors, and we just sort of built from there. I'll give you one example. So we did that. We did a Series A, thankfully with Third Rock. Then we did a Series B Well, we started to get some interest from folks like Fidelity, who will do a lot of post IPO public investing. And that's important because we knew we wanted to eventually be a public company given the amount of money that we needed, right? And we were talking about hundreds of millions of dollars to really develop the science the way we think it needs to be so we can get to an important therapy. So I remember going after our Series B round, we were in a position to try and go public in the IPO, and it was in October. It was 2016. There was something going on that year, right? And in elections and all of that. And there was, I'll tell you, there was just not a lot of love, and maybe it's getting better now. You tell me, but not a lot of love for biopharma, and particularly for big pharma.
No.
And there was this whole. Do you remember this whole Shkreli guy who?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Hillary Clinton tweeted about that the week we were trying to price the IPO. It was tricky. And we ended up having to cut the price of the IPO, do a smaller offering because not everybody was that excited about what we were doing, maybe as an industry, but certainly as MyoKardia. And so, it's the beginning, as we said, not the
Mhm.
end. And it's how you finish. And so we were thankful we did it because we were able then now as a public company, it's a lot easier to raise money. It's a little more efficient because we've got, regulations that make it um, uh, uh, uniform, the level of transparency we need to have with the public about what we're doing, the ability to share kind of what's important information, which then allows us to be quicker in selling stock in the public market, and then hopefully being able to raise more to allow us to do the important research and support the community the way we need to.
So in HCM, and I have to pause and say, the fall of 2016, I was kind of sidelined at that point in time. So I was not ultimately engaged with that part of your process because I was going for my heart transplant at that time.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really some technical difficulties, and we're going to wait for our community to come on back and join us. And if you're watching this afterwards, they're going to be edited together. So if you see a small glitch, we had a breakdown in technology. So we're going to wait for a second for them to join us. It is, I was going to say March. Thank God it's not March anymore. We passed that. It's May 6th, 2020, my day 55. I keep doing it the wrong way. 55, there it is, of quarantine. It is now 6 p.m. Eastern time, and we have people now joining us again. So hi, and welcome back, and sorry about the technical difficulty. We were discussing how we go through and I'm going to backtrack a little bit because I think we lost them there. We started our conversation talking about not only where Tassos came from personally, but how MyoKardia came to be where they are, and the process of investor, hey, is there a market here? Is this real? To developing a company model, to developing the science, to developing clinical trial opportunities, to now being thank you, Donna, to now actually being in the place where we can now do these trials. And where are we in trials? Because before the interview took place and we posted that it was going to happen, I was inundated with questions about when is this going to happen? And when does something come to market? I'm like, okay, what's happening? And market's a long way off. So y'all got to calm down a little bit. Got ways to go. So tell us what the process looks like.
So I'm just looking at the feed here, which is just awesome, Lisa, from your viewers. Beta blocker break, hydration break. This is great. You were grace under pressure right there, by the way.
Oh,
completely chill and just got us back rolling. Yeah. So we getting public was the beginning, and it really allows us to more efficiently raise the capital we need. And the way this works is we basically have a plan and how we want to progress the science in the pipeline, and along the way there are proof points that give us all confidence that things are working at least at the moment, and are tracking to something which may have potential for patients. And all of it is really, at the end of the day, to make sure we have therapies that matter to society, or else what is the point, right? And there's also no point in having these therapies if you can't get them to people who need them as well. So we get out there in 16 and we have some early clinical data, and the idea is to kind of help the investors understand what we're going to achieve in a given time period, because we'll likely need to be coming back, and we have, to them for more funding, but after we've sort of proved that the
Concept.
science is tracking. Exactly. And so if we flash forward to today, we've got now 3 of our drugs in clinical development, or 3 investigational products in clinical development, that are going through the rigorous process, which is appropriately so, with a lot of guidance and collaboration with the FDA, who, is working their tail off, especially now during COVID. There was a
Okay.
drug approved by the cardiorenal division today, right?
Oh,
So, if anybody was wondering if they were working hard, they're working hard. They approved an important drug for heart failure today, by the way, which is great news. So we set this out, and we hope that we can deliver on the expectations that we set, and that allows us, as long as the science is tracking, it does allow us to get back to investors and raise more money. So until there is a drug approved, we have no revenue, at least in our company, and we continue to rely on funding our work through selling stock of the company. At some point, fingers crossed, we have the ability to generate revenue through product sales, and then we've got more flexibility and can really sort of think big about how we can engage even more with the community to just do even better if we can.
so we have 2 arms of this of a study related to HCM, and full disclosure, HCMA was able to partner with MyoKardia, like we had previously with Gilead, and like we will with other companies coming up in the future, to help the recruitment aspect, because HCMA has contact with, I don't know, HCM patients. So why the theory from the HCMA and the board of directors is, why add to the cost of development of drug by making drug companies go out to the market and try to find HCM patients like looking for needles in haystacks, when they can come directly to the haystack? And we have lots of very engaged patients who are willing and wanting to participate in clinical trials. So many of you may have taken part in a survey where you were asked, do you want to participate in a clinical trial? And that's how HCMA and MyoKardia work together to help get you involved with that clinical trial. And a lot more people wanted to be involved in the trial than could be, for logistics reasons and timing and whatever. So first of all, thank you all for your participation. We can't thank you enough for giving back. I've been in many clinical trials myself, and we don't get to the answers without the trials, and we don't get to the trials without the patients. So thank you all. And that's how one of the ways that MyoKardia and HCMA are working together, because we have shared interest. So now we've got some data, more coming later this year, we hope. What's the timeline and the pathway for these trials to turn into something actionable for patients?
Yeah. So we're working as hard as we can, and we've got to make sure that we are doing good science, and we're partnering with FDA. And at the end of the day, we've got to make sure that we've got a compelling package, both establishing that the therapies we're working on are safe and that they are effective in an important aspect of the disease. And so for us now, as you pointed out, Lisa, we are in the phase 3 part of the study with one of our investigational drugs for obstructed HCM. And we have completed a phase 2, which we talked about at the American College of Cardiology just it seems like ages ago, but it probably wasn't, right? It was maybe
Like
6 or 7
5
weeks
weeks
ago.
ago. 5 weeks ago.
Yeah, this is like COVID time, which is on a different scale, it
Days left
seems.
for like 72 hours or something. I don't know.
I know, exactly. Well, it was at least, within the 55 days, right?
It
Because we
was
had
within the
started
55
quarantine.
days. I was
Yeah,
working in this seat.
yeah, and I mean that was a study that was focused on HCM without an obstruction, or non-obstructed HCM, and so this is all investigational at this stage. We are hoping that the evidence that we generate through these clinical trials will be enough to establish safety and efficacy. And so what we're doing now is we're expecting to have the data from this pivotal study, the phase 3 study in obstructed HCM, sometime this quarter. So before the end of June. And if it's positive, we're going to want to talk to the FDA and see if this is sufficient, along with, we have a lot of other studies with this investigational drug. Is it sufficient together with the other studies for them to accept a registration package and then review? So, it's we've got some more work to do, but we're getting ever so close to that. And of course, this pivotal result is going to be important um, for patients, for the company, and for helping us really understand the potential of this investigational drug.
So I want to pause there for a moment because there's another area that MyoKardia and HCMA are partnering on, and that is MyoKardia is a sponsor of our upcoming patient-focused drug development meeting, which in terms of, for those who are not savvy and they don't understand how nonprofits like HCMA are funded from sponsorship, we have a project that we want to do. We go to industry and we say, hey, it's a little bit above our budget, but we have shared interest. You don't get to tell us how to do it, but you can pay for it if you want. And that's what we've gone to MyoKardia with this PFD, which is a patient-focused drug development meeting, where you, the patients, will have the opportunity to speak directly to the FDA on June 26th, sitting at the comfort of your computer, because everything's now virtual. And you can explain to FDA what your burden of disease is, what it's like for you to live with HCM. There'll be survey questions. There'll be opportunities for you to phone in and speak directly to the leadership of FDA to let them know what it really is like to live in our skin, what it really feels like to know that your child has the same disease that you do, to let them know what it means to us as HCM patients to struggle to maintain our health insurance because our lives depend on it, to make sure that we get therapies that fit what we need, not what, excuse me, Tassos, but some drug company thinks they want to sell us. And, if a drug company comes up with a drug that improves a biomarker by 5%, but we still can't walk across the street and keep our breath, that 5% doesn't mean anything to me. I want to be able to walk across the street and run up a flight of stairs. So June 26th, go to the HCMA website and sign up and join us, because this is an opportunity for us, the patients, to clearly, without a filter, tell the FDA what it is that we need, so that drug manufacturers and developers like MyoKardia and others can look at that data and make sure that they're hitting what we, the patients, need, not what somebody thinks they want to sell. Why would you spend billions of dollars to develop a drug that doesn't make us feel better? So you, the patient, tell us what you need so that they can make the drugs that make us feel better. So that's critical that y'all participate in that. And we thank MyoKardia and Cytokinetics and others who have helped fund that endeavor, because that's what's going to help us get to the finish line. So the big question, and I'm kind of ignoring a few questions on the side here because I know we can't answer them. When do we think we might hit what could be viewed as a finish line, and what timelines are people looking at till maybe something becomes available? And these are hypotheticals, guys, because
I know
there's a lot
it's
of what ifs.
it's really hard to say, Lisa, and it in some ways, the conversation needs to happen with the FDA with the data in hand, and we're hopeful that we're a few years away. But I don't want to get ahead of myself here and making statements that are inappropriate, just given how important the interactions are with a lot of these other stakeholders. I did want to say something, though. I wanted to, one, thank you for your efforts in driving the PFDD at the FDA. And if I could, I just wanted to reiterate how important it is to get the patient perspective here, because you're absolutely right. The FDA is doing, I think, a really good job to try and make sure great science is done to support important medicines for diseases like HCM. The HCM in general, and the FDA is not kind of immune to this, but they're people, they're physicians, they see a lot of diseases. But relatively speaking, we all need to know more about HCM and really understand it through your perspective. So the more that companies, FDA, insurers, right, other non-specialist cardiologists and physicians understand this disease, how it actually affects you, right? Because we don't necessarily view a transplant as like the gold standard here, right?
No,
We got to
you
be able
really
to do
want to do that.
better. And so once upon a time, we had more sudden cardiac death for sure. And now we have implantable defibrillators. That can't be good enough. So, getting folks to really understand how this disease affects you day to day is really, really important. I can't emphasize that enough because it is in some cases misunderstood, but definitely not well enough understood condition. And the perspective that matters the most is yours. So this is such a golden opportunity to get to, as you said, the people who are really thoughtful about new drugs and how to kind of think about the risk benefit of these drugs. And so I'm grateful for the FDA and for you for pulling this together. So just a plug to get people
Huge
really
plug.
engaged in this, which is important. I
Definitely.
also wanted to thank, you mentioned earlier your efforts in helping get patients aware of clinical trials, et cetera. And so obviously just nothing happens without one, patient input and patient participation in our studies. And, that's not a small thing, right? To basically say, I'm going to go into a clinical research on an investigational drug. So it's a huge responsibility that we take on in managing those studies, but we've got an incredible gratitude for the participants in that. And so, hopefully we're getting close here, Lisa, where the evidence will help support an approval of a drug here, but we've got a little bit more work to do here for sure. And we'll update. We'll probably have more updates actually on the timeline when we get the results from this pivotal trial.
Couple things I want to kind of wrap up with because we're taking a little bit longer than I had anticipated. But hey, you're on the West Coast, I'm on the East Coast. We can just keep bantering back and forth. So number one, as you and I have discussed, this is the start of these types of public conversations. It will maybe air in future Facebook episodes, or we may be going straight to the podcast, Tales from the Heart, which is slowly getting populated, and you can get it on iTunes and Spotify now. So I'm really excited about that. And the idea of these podcasts and these conversations is to make sure that the patient community is engaged with the other stakeholders, because face it, we're in this together. We are a partnership. I don't say that I'm not going to push the envelope sometimes and ask for things and demand more, because I'm here for the patients and you are too, but you're on a different side. So we're going to push and pull sometimes. And, you guys know me, you understand it. But we have to make sure that everybody has a voice here. I want to double back to some of the things that are going on with the FDA. Last October, the FDA had invited me to be a participant and speaker at their clinical trial training program. And they asked me to specifically talk to them about how we, a small nonprofit patient advocacy group, has been partnering with industry to help lead discovery and to help with various aspects of clinical trials. And the FDA was really excited to have us there and have this conversation. But a couple of very interesting things happened during this process. Number one, in the 3-day process of this program, 3 examples were given by the FDA about patient X who happens to have hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. They didn't really put 2 and 2 together that I was in the audience. So FDA is thinking about HCM a lot more than some people might think. And I was even approached by certain members of the faculty, and well, not necessarily faculty, but the attendees who actually are at the FDA, who are 1 in 500 too. So they get it. They're real people. They aren't just, a box of bureaucrats. They are people who care. Some of them have very personal reasons to care, and that's good. You want people to have skin in the game. So I was a little surprised to find some of them there, and they were the utmost professional people, and they want the best science, and they want to help industry bring that good science in so that we, the patients, can be helped with minimal side effects. So I'm going to go to some of the questions, and then I'll kind of wrap up on things. A name that I know you know, Wendy. Oh, that's a cute picture, Wendy. Beyond the PFD Dee, is there anything that patients can do to influence the FDA in certain new therapies, participate in the PFD Dee? And beyond that, you got to stay in touch with the HCMA, because we are going to continue the dialogue with the FDA. And I do want to talk a little bit about process. And process, and Tassos may not know some of this, because we are unable to meet in a room with FDA in June, we're going to be doing this virtually. They're giving us the opportunity to, after the meeting is done and we create our voice of the patient report, we are going to be invited to the FDA to present the report to leadership of the FDA in person, which doesn't normally get done. So we'll have that opportunity. So even after the meeting, the report is going to need to be written. So if you come up with a brilliant idea that it didn't come to you the day of the meeting, circle back with us. You'll have 45 days to comment, and then we'll put the whole report together. So we encourage you to do that. And in addition to that, the HCMA, we were heading on a project, and then COVID happened, so it's kind of on hold right now. But we're building our legislative advocacy teams, and we're going to be doing state level initiatives to help improve the well child screenings of families so that we can identify those with genetic heart disease earlier. As Tassos said, we want to get these therapies in there earlier, but we need to identify people earlier. So there's going to be this opportunity for more and more people to get involved. In addition to that, for support, we're going to be starting online Zoom support groups, and we're going to be doing online regional meetings. So there's lots of ways for you to get involved and lots of cool stuff coming. Some people have very specific questions on mavacamten, and I'm not going to get into the sciencey details of mavacamten and does it work on this gene versus that gene, because we don't know yet, do we?
Well, what we don't know about it in people, in humans, but I did catch my eye caught a thin filament mutation, and we do think that there, at least in some animal models, we're seeing potential there. We feel really good in these models too around myosin heavy chain and myosin binding protein C. And for those of you with a thin filament mutation, it's an area of very active research for us as well. And so this is part of our kind of long-term commitment, just to give you a feel for it, which I definitely want to make sure you all take away is, we're here for you, and we are not going anywhere. We're not going to kind of wake up one day and pivot into a different disease area. This is the company. And so understanding whether mavacamten or any of our drugs has differential effectiveness in one set of mutations or another, or one stage of the disease for another, is very important part of our strategy. So a lot of what we look at in clinical trials is to really understand, what did we see that was different from one patient to another, and really go deep on that. And if we need to develop a new therapy down the road that might be better than our existing investigational drugs, we want to do it. So we are here to figure it out, and there's something very liberating about just following that science, as opposed to pushing a product or a particular drug because it's all you have. It's not going to be all we have, and it's not going to be all we do.
So 2 questions, and then I'm going to go to one of these questions, and then we're going to wrap in a sec. Number 1, some of the questions that I've been getting over the years were, well, they're a startup. They're going to have this pop. They're going to get a labeled indication drug, and they're going to sell off to one of the big boys. Is that in the business plan?
It's not in the business plan for sure. I would love nothing more than for MyoKardia to be around for the next 20 to 30 years, because it means like we've done something really important for patients, but also, for our employee community, and have people engaged and wanting to be there, and their families. So we are building the company with that kind of vision in mind. Obviously, we can't control things that go on, everything that goes on, but our strategy is to build a foundation for long-term independent growth by doing great science and developing therapies that matter to patients.
You and I discussed this in the pre-interview, and I'll bring it up now. It is my sincere hope, nudge, nudge, push, push, that when you go to manufacture a drug, if it should become approved, that it be manufactured in the United States. We don't manufacture enough medications in the United States, and we're seeing the downstream effect of some of the problems that are coming out of China and India right now. No offense to those countries, but some of the quality of drugs are just not there, and the oversight isn't there. So can we hope that MyoKardia is looking at American-based manufacturing?
Well, we definitely listen to the patients, who we're definitely listening to you. So we are going to look into that for sure. We haven't settled in on our long-term kind of commercial manufacturing plans, but I'm very sympathetic to your point of view on this, Lisa, and it's going to be something that we're definitely going to work through.
And the last one that I'm going to hit you with, and then I'm going to hit you with one of the audience questions, is pricing. When will, and I know that's way down the line because we're not approved yet, and we may never get approved, but if it were to get approved, where is the pricing and what support will be available for those who might find it out of their financial reach?
So you're right. We haven't yet decided on a price for mavacamten. It's obviously a very critical decision that we're taking super seriously. And, our core values as a company are around putting patients first, right? It's one of our 5 core values. And the goal, and I'll tell you, for me and for my team and the whole company, is to reach as many patients who can benefit from our medicines. We want to get there, and that we want to ensure that patients that are appropriately prescribed the medications get them. And our kind of philosophy on this is to really support the patients extensively. So that's our orientation. How we're going to land on a price is going to be driven in part by, what's the data tell us, right? How much benefit are we really seeing here? And if that's, in large part, that story is being written right now. But we're going to involve patients, insurers, and physicians in making that determination, Lisa. So the patient perspective on that is going to be important. So key takeaway is, philosophically, we're driven to get the therapy to as many patients who can benefit from it as possible. And we're totally recognizing how, especially patient out-of-pocket costs are growing and the deductibles are going up. And there's not a lot. We want to impact as much as we can. And so we've got to be sensitive to that. And we're going to be there to help support that.
Well, we're happy about that. I'm going to give Jason the final question. Are there going to be more opportunities to join a mavacamten study without having been an Explorer or Maverick?
Well, yeah, there will be. We have a study that was really slated to start now, and with COVID, we've hit the pause button in an abundance of caution to make sure we can safely do clinical trials at these sites. And as soon as those sites are ready to go, we want to start that. That's a study we call Valor. It's a study that is looking at patients who have been referred to a septal reduction therapy, and really looking to see if we can obviate the need for one and how we compare there in a different kind of context. So we're excited about that. Stay tuned on that. That's hopefully going to start in the not too distant future, but we're ready to go as soon as the sites are ready to go.
I actually think that COVID may have helped a little bit in part of that study design and allowing more telemedicine involvement. And I think some of the people that are going to be involved in that study have gotten more comfortable with telemedicine so that patients can be spoken to and evaluated at a distance. And that'll be really helpful.
Lisa, you and I haven't talked about that yet, but I actually think there's some massive takeaways here from the COVID situation, and
We've been talking
thinking
about
about,
that.
yeah, I mean, thinking about, limiting the burden, let's say, on study participants to come to sites. The more we can do at home, both in terms of remote monitoring and things like that, I think the better. And, we didn't think it was possible in some cases, and here we are. COVID is sort of making it required. And yeah, I'll tell you, the MyoKardia team is all over this, and we've got ways to do this. We've got some thinking. We want to do it the right way. I think the FDA is open to good science around this for sure, but I think it's going to happen.
I know that when I was at FDA in October, that a number of people are very, very interested in virtual trials. And the FDA wants to figure out how to do virtual trials because, face it, it's cheaper. And you don't have all the travel, you don't have all the overhead expenses. And if you're doing telemedicine, it's less resource usage, and you can get the same answers as long as you're not, giving up quality and patient safety is ensured. Why aren't we using technology more? So I think we're getting to a pretty cool time. Okay.
Well, I'll tell you, we're gonna take our cues from you and your audience here on making sure we get that part of it right. But it does seem like there's an opportunity to do better for the patient community through this types of approaches.
I'm hoping so. Brian, mavacamten will be useful. Will mavacamten potentially be useful with diastolic dysfunction and cardiac fibrosis? we're waiting to find that out. That's what trials are
Yeah.
all about.
I'll tell you, Brian, two things on that. So far, I mean, it's early data, but it does look like mavacamten is helping with diastolic relaxation. We're seeing in our studies reductions in some things like NT-proBNP, which is, gets released when there's stress in the walls with elevated pressures that happen when you don't have enough diastolic relaxation. And we're seeing this too in some of the pig and the animal work. So that's super exciting and something we are going to really investigate. On the fibrosis front, we are doing a study right now using MRI. So hopefully because the MRI will help us get a better look, more resolution on what's happening at the cellular level. And so in animals, we have seen less fibrosis, but we're not, we're a little different. And when we have that MRI data, we hope to be able to say something about that.
When the Valor sites are available, I will post them on the HCMA website. There is some information on clinicaltrials.gov, but more specific information will be available through the HCMA when it's available and when they launch. I do have to give a funny thing, and then I'm going to thank Tassos and do a little something else for a second. But many years ago, a founding board member of the HCMA gave me a book. It was a children's book, and it was called If Pigs Could Fly. And for a while, we used that as our mantra. There may not be a cure for HCM, but hey, someday pigs might fly. And that was 24 years ago. And now we have mutant pig models. So I find it really interesting that we were trying to make pigs fly 24 years ago, and now pigs are teaching us so much about HCM, and I love those little pigs, and I'm grateful to those little pigs. So thank you to the little pig farms. So that's that. I'm going to put Tassos down for a bit. So Tassos, thank you so much for this time today and letting our audience get to know both you and MyoKardia and understand the process a little bit more. This is going to be an ongoing conversation, and I'm looking forward to having you back again.
I can't wait, Lisa. I really got to thank you for everything you're doing for patients, and you do a lot for all the input and guidance that you've given us. The orientation that we get, our North Star is this community here. I mean, this is why I'm at the company. This is why 250 passionate scientists and people are at the company, is to help, alleviate the burden of this disease. And we can't figure that out without you and without your super honest and raw kind of point of view, right? Which, you always give us. I can count on you for that. And it's important, but I want to encourage everybody who's on this to do that. I mean, we are a company that is a values-driven company in this for you all. And we're not going to be able to figure this out without a lot of input from you. So it's an open invitation. I hope you guys kind of take the invitation, and I hope you have me back on.
We'll definitely do that. And I'm going to drop Tassos off the screen for a moment. I'm going to put him down here, and he's going to hold on for me for a minute. And I'm going to add something else into the stream. And the timing is actually perfect. And I'm going to go like this. Nope, I'm going to go like that. 24 hours ago to the moment, I was in a nursing home saying goodbye to my mother-in-law. Hannah Honey Selberg passed away, having achieved 88 years and a lot of fun. Yesterday, just at this time, she took her last breath. And I'm happy to say we were able to be with her in those last moments. What I want you to know about my mother-in-law isn't what most people might want you to think about their mother-in-law. If you attended an HCMA meeting in the 2002 to 2007 time period, you probably saw her at the registration table. If you attended any of the golf outings that we used to have, she was always there selling raffle tickets. And with that big personality and that red hair and that very Brooklyn, Jersey girl attitude, she was there supporting us, her daughter-in-law and her granddaughter who have HCM. And she was a really neat lady. And unfortunately, we're not allowed to have a funeral. Tomorrow, she will be laid to rest. We knew this was coming, but it doesn't make it any easier to say goodbye to somebody that I've known since I'm 14 years old. So some people get mother-in-laws. I got a honey. And I will miss her forever. And this necklace she gave me a couple of days before she died. And I'm going to go like this and show you. It was the first gift my father-in-law ever gave her. and she made sure she gave it to me a couple of weeks ago. She wanted me to keep it. So I'm wearing it today, and I'll wear it for a while for her. And she will be greatly missed. I thank you all for your time and attention today, and especially thanks to Tassos and all of our team over at MyoKardia. We're looking forward to keeping the conversation going. Thank you all. Have a great day.